Here we go again. We are now in the present with Sanji's official debut in the overarching story of One Piece. Interestingly enough, Sanji first appears before the reader using Keigo, an honorific speech that suits his initial role as a sous chef turned waiter. Respectful as he sounds, his words remain a little rough around the edges. While we can look at this as the obligatory fulfillment of a vacancy left behind by the missing waitstaff, this approach resurfaces most notably in Wano at the Flower Capital, where Sanji, under the guise of Sangoro, happily offers his special soba to his customers. In contrast to his cool reception of Full Body, he jovially asks Kyoshiro's men to wait in line if they want servings of their own. For all his attitude as the token delinquent of the crew, Sanji really enjoys serving. If that isn't Gap Moe, I don't know what is. Sanji's interactions with Full Body are decidedly less moe. To be fair, Sanji does his share of the provoking when he decides to flirt with Moody, which, talk about bold. But what happens here is something I really dislike about Toei Animation's take on Sanji's character. I think the current anime has done a phenomenal job of adapting some key scenes. The emotional beats of Sanji's fight against Queen are breathtaking in their visuality. But it also muddles Sanji's behavior toward women by disregarding his demonstrated values from the manga. While Sanji has his faults, he tends to keep his hands to himself and doesn't initiate contact with women, especially before the time skip. The exceptions in which he does get close are when the mood is celebratory, which is when he'll go for a hug with Nojiko or a dance by the bonfire on Skypiea. Sanji's credo where ladies are concerned is basically to look respectfully, and my guess is that this is an extension of Zev's teachings on chivalry. Sanji's gentlemanly abstinence renders him utterly weak to Nami's advances when she plays him for a free meal by holding his face, because he's not used to a woman's touch, and this is unspoken proof of how steadfastly he lives by his values before they're brought to the forefront during the Water 7 saga. By having him grab Moody's hand and wrap an arm around Konus' waist unprompted, Toei brushes aside Sanji's efforts to be what he considers a proper gentleman, which is a little disheartening when it concerns a character who cares so much about the role he plays. But back to Full Body again. I swear he's here. I wonder if Sanji's fear of bugs wasn't fully realized at this time, or if he's okay with them so long as they're not alive and in his face. Either way, his respect for food trumps any fear he might have, just as he has no trouble falling for women like Black Maria. I think it goes to show that, in the case of Sanji, love will always prevail. So when Full Body disrespects the soup, Sanji drops his honorific speech and goes after him with all of his might. This is where we really see the delinquent side of Sanji, because he's pretty much ready to commit murder for Zev's happiness. Sanji's introduction is, to say the least, explosive. Then comes along Gin, and we see another side of him that rounds out his character. The joke is that Sanji always attracts men despite his efforts to woo women, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that he does go out of his way for them when it counts. Gin, Kinemon, and the G5 are some of the most overt examples of how Sanji will help those in need, regardless of gender. When he feeds Gin, he preemptively challenges the notion that he would only treat a woman based on his reactions to Nami later. This is a subtle lead-up to what he says aboard the Puffing Tom, that cooking is love. Sanji is romantically attracted to beautiful women. He falls in love easily, but the love he expresses toward Nami, for example, is the wanting kind, koi. When it comes to food and ladies as a whole, he refers to a love that is giving and selfless in nature, ai. His wanting love desires reciprocation, but his giving love wishes to serve. Sanji doesn't discriminate when he feeds someone. Man, woman, non-binary person, he will share his food with anybody. In other words, he loves everyone by default. And that's why this moment works, because Gin is a man. I think Rayleigh mentions during the 2-year training that Luffy has an innate grasp of observation haki, so it's even more meaningful that he seeks to recruit Sanji after hearing how joyously Sanji's heart sings upon feeding Gin out on the deck. It's a plus that Sanji can cook well, but Luffy has always wanted Sanji on his crew for his heart. But speaking of women, I noticed with this book that Sanji changes his first-person pronoun to humble himself whenever he waxes poetic in a love-struck spell. In doing so, he elevates the women in his verses, but this is also reflective of how he responds to his prospects of romance. That is, he fails to react at all. Sanji does not consider himself a catch. He indicates in Wano that having a higher bounty than Zoro might make him more appealing, but he's hopelessly dense because his self-hatred clouds his perception in a relationship where he's more concerned about being useful to the other party. He always asks Nami and Robin if they've fallen for him, but he doesn't expect them to answer back. It's wishful thinking because he tacitly considers himself beneath them. He doesn't expect anyone to actually love him. Even with Pudding, he only makes room to consider her feelings in their upcoming marriage by forcing himself to smile for her benefit. And the thing is that all beautiful women fall under the umbrella of his selfless love of ladies in general, so he's perfectly content to give and give without taking, even if he does tear up from envy when Nami hugs Jinbei. This drive to give until he's wrung dry segues into the crux of his conflict with Zeph, who demands that he leave the Baratie. When Sanji defends his culinary pride against Zeph, he doubles down on remaining the sous chef, but Zeph sees the title for what it is, shackles. Sanji is bound to the Baratie out of guilt. He refers to himself as a mere brat when talking about Zeph's sacrifice, and what he says to Pudding before his proposal deepens the significance of the statement. Sanji feels indebted to anyone who treats him with basic human decency. He never managed to build a strong foundation for his identity as a child. Consequently, his self-worth has no legs on which to stand. With the mindset of worthlessness beaten into him by his bird family, he writes himself off as an inconsequential urchin who's destroyed the life of someone far worthier than him. The thing about Sanji is that all of his notable qualities are double-edged. At its most extreme, his kindness can be so selfless that it swerves into self-serving selfishness. Sanji shares his cooking with everyone, but feeding Krieg endangers the Baratie. He's grateful for everything Zeph has done for him, but he smothers himself in recompense. He will go on to bake a mean cake for Big Mom and knock her out from flavor alone, only to revitalize her in her pursuit of his crew. There are consequences to Sanji's kindness for all the hearts he wins along the way, and in the case of Zeph, it is because he views himself as a burden. When he puts so much consideration into the other party, insofar that he devalues himself, he hurts those who love him. He does Zeph a disservice by grounding himself on the Baratie when he's meant to fly on the legs of his faith. Instead, he's essentially been chewing on his wings for 9 years, and the realization of this enrages Luffy, who rebukes Sanji for self-mutilating in answer to Zeph's sacrifice. Sanji struggles with his self-image, so much so that he will change himself if he believes doing so will benefit others. He exists not for himself, but for his loved ones because he is so grateful for the privilege to be in their lives. This manifests as a readiness to surrender his dreams, even his life. Sanji is often denigrated for lacking willpower when he tells Zoro to give up on his dream, but the reality is that he's not himself throughout this arc. At 10 years old, Sanji was ready to kill in order to realize his dream of finding the All Blue. He didn't think about submitting. Dying wasn't even an option. He had faith and willpower down in spades. But because he is so appreciative of the good in his life, he places everyone and their mothers leagues above himself. He has not given himself permission to dream in 9 years, not because he's weak-willed, but because he's weighed down by the shame of what he did to Zeph, even though it was Zeph's choice. All this time, he has been over-apologizing to Zeph as he had to his family in Germa. Zoro's duel with Mihawk is often the highlight of the Baratie arc for many readers. Ironic as that is, it makes perfect sense for this moment to be a standout because it's meant to inspire Sanji as well. Both Luffy and Zoro demonstrate the unapologetic pride of chasing a dream ridiculed by others. Sanji was once ridiculed too. He meets 2 dreamers like him and his heart begins to stir again, enough so that he tells Luffy about the All Blue after the latter's showdown with Krieg. This is why he has so much faith in Luffy and respect for Zoro, no matter how much he scolds and bickers with them. But let's rewind a bit to the fight with the Krieg pirates. The cooks blame Sanji for Krieg's revitalization, and Sanji understands that this is the consequence of his morality to feed anyone who's hungry. So he does what he excels at, which is to take responsibility by preparing to defend the Baratie with his life. Sanji knows how burdensome he can be, but he does everything in his power to alleviate the weight through accountability. Zeph defends Sanji's empathetic choice to save the starving masses, and we see Sanji light a cigarette. I always forget to pay attention to this, but there are moments when Sanji doesn't actually smoke despite having a cigarette in his mouth. One instance is after Little Garden in Nami's quarters, where he forgoes smoking out of consideration for her ailing health. It's a very conscious action on his part because he does rely on smoking to regulate himself. What began as an attempt at coming off as a grown-up, and therefore more useful to Zeph, has become a dependency by age 19. And at 21, Nami gives him the blessing to smoke in her body on punk hazard. Based on that, it's probably more than just a bodily need on his part. Sanji has a lot of grace that's often overlooked due to his temper. He's prone to starting fights and landing himself in trouble, but even that anger is a symptom of his love. Very quickly, he goes from fighting Yin to holding him after the poisonous gas attack. Sanji doesn't really hold grudges for himself. What resentment he hangs on to is often on behalf of somebody else. I mentioned his outburst at Jinbei in the previous video, but he also does this to Frankie on the Puffing Tom, despite his falling out with Usopp. In both cases, Sanji gets on with Jinbei and Frankie almost right away after their respective victims assure him that their grievances are water under the bridge. Sanji's anger is a type that ignites when he spies a bully, and his solution is to beat the snot out of said bully. Zeph all but likens Sanji to a spear, alluding to his symbolic position as Sun God Luffy's spear. Zeph really sees everything for what it is, and his side of things is awfully poignant if understated. According to Oda-sensei, he's the quintessential man, so his actions speak louder for him. For Sanji, the hands are sacred tools because they are the mediums to channel his love into cooking. If he cannot cook, his heart cannot be expressed, and he would rather die. The monster trio share several meaningful parallels. Between Luffy and Sanji, 2 such parallels lie in Shanks, Garp, and Zeph. Because if the hands are the channels to one's heart, then Zeph's is a fist of love when he strikes Sanji in an attempt to drive him out of the Baratie. Zeph loves Sanji deeply, but this is where Sanji's conditioning strikes again, because all he ever sees is the damage he's wrought. First he took a leg, and now he's made Zeph forsake the principle of never using hands to do harm. It takes a moment, but Sanji soon learns through some candidness that it's time for him to move on. Sanji reminisces about his time at the Baratie as he gears up for his departure. He ultimately assumes the Dogeza stance, which is a massive gesture that speaks from the heart. He leaves in the same fashion as Luffy, where he says that he'll meet everyone again. This is the most honest he allows himself to be with the cooks, and it's actually a big deal. Sanji loves everyone, but he's not good at expressing his affection toward men. As I stated in a previous video, I don't think this is because of what his biological family did to him, but because of the Baratie's culture. The cooks there are gruff, harsh, and violent. If they weren't, the restaurant would have sunk years ago at the hands of pirates. Sanji is probably the Baratie's softest cook, but he's still one of them and speaks their language. He's far more at home expressing his adoration of women, so he often uses Nami's name as a crutch. Whole Cake Island puts this on full blast when he panics and tries to pretend that he only cares about Nami's safety after reconciling with Luffy. When examining his rough treatment of men, it's important to consider Sanji's interactions with Zeph, whom Sanji loves the most in the world, alongside Sora. And with this, the Baratie arc comes to an end. Incidentally, I think the simplistic clean line work of the early days really suits Sanji. When he debuts, he's very rigid in the way he presents himself. His hair is styled just so, and there's a curated look about him. As time passes, he begins to loosen up more, both in attitude and appearance, and it's kind of nice to see him grow into himself after he's had to deny what he's wanted for so long.